The Ghost of a Mother in the Forest. I was never someone who truly believed in ghosts. I always thought they were just products of imagination, created to explain the unexplainable. But everything changed when I was in that cursed forest. It was supposed to be a normal overnight trip, and quite an easy one. The locals whispered about the forest being haunted, but I didn't pay much attention to that. The road was rough, and the darkness grew thicker as I drove deeper into the forest. My headlights barely cut through the fog, so I had to be more careful. Then suddenly, she appeared. An old woman stood in the middle of the road, hunched over, her eyes fixed on me as I stopped. I honked, but she didn't seem to hear, so I opened the door and shouted for her to move so I could pass. She didn't react at all. Instead, she slowly turned, looked straight at me, and asked, "Have you seen my daughter?" She kept asking, her voice growing more desperate. Then suddenly walked away, sobbing, leaving me confused and shaking. In my mind, I tried to dismiss the encounter with the woman as I continued my journey, but her words kept echoing in my head, gnawing at my sanity. When I finally made it out of the forest at dawn, I stopped at a small grocery store. The shopkeeper was kind, and I chatted with him for a while. But as I looked out the window, I saw her again, standing at the edge of the forest, staring at me. Fear started to creep in, and that's when the shopkeeper told me about her. He said that she had lost her mind after a tragic accident and now wanders the forest, searching for her long-lost daughter. I dismissed the story again, thinking it was just a coincidence. That night, as I drove back through the forest, the rain started pouring down heavily, making the road more dangerous. But I kept going, just wanting to get out of there as quickly as possible. Then, through the rain, I saw another woman. But this time, she wasn't alone, and in her arms was a child who looked frail, almost lifeless. I intended to drive past. I hesitated, but my conscience wouldn't let me. I stopped and asked if they needed a ride. She looked pale, like she'd been out in the rain for too long. She nodded gratefully and climbed into my car with the child in her arms. I handed them a towel to dry off, and then she directed me to a hospital. When we arrived, she quietly thanked me before heading into the building. I sighed with relief, but as I was about to leave, I noticed something in the back of the car. It was the black umbrella she had been carrying. It was still in my car, and when I turned to look back at the hospital, I was almost paralyzed with what I saw. I looked away for just a few seconds, and when I looked back, they were gone. It was as if they had vanished into the rain. Feeling confused, I decided it was best to leave as soon as possible. As I neared home, the rain was still pouring, and the parking lot was quite far from my house, so I had to use the black umbrella left in my truck. However, I felt a bit hesitant to use it, remembering that it belonged to the woman and her son, but I had no other choice. As I was walking, a strong gust of wind almost tore the umbrella from my hand, and suddenly, a wooden beam came crashing down from above, about to fall on me. It could have killed me, but the umbrella somehow pulled me to the side, saving my life. Shaking, I realized the umbrella wasn't just an ordinary umbrella. Perhaps it was a gift the woman left behind to protect me. The next morning, I went back to the grocery store, determined to uncover the truth. The shopkeeper hesitated, but finally told me the whole story. The woman and her child were spirits, doomed to wander the forest after a tragic accident. She died trying to protect her son. It happened on a stormy night when she was shunned and refused help by passing travelers. Some even splashed her with mud. She used her body to shield the child, but unfortunately, she slipped and fell off a cliff. On rainy days, if drivers refused to give her a ride, she would mysteriously appear in their cars and haunt them. Feeling a deep sense of injustice, She continues to seek out and punish those who don't help them. The old woman, unable to bear the unbearable pain of losing her daughter and grandson, went mad shortly after. Since that horrific accident, the villagers have often seen her holding a black umbrella, muttering nonsense. With a heavy heart, I visited their graves, returned the umbrella, and expressed my gratitude. As I walked away, I knew my life had changed forever. I had encountered something beyond the realm of the living, and from that day on, I would never doubt their existence again. Mysterious hitchhiker. Ami didn't really like driving. A few years ago, she had to drive for hours every day to attend her specialized course. One day, on her usual route, the traffic was worse than she expected. She was tired and frustrated, inching her car forward bit by bit, feeling like time was dragging on endlessly. The cause of the traffic jam was a broken-down bus. Ami finally passed it and sighed with relief as the road ahead cleared up. But then, a few miles later, something caught Ami's attention. At a bus stop, there was a pregnant woman with her thumb out, trying to hitch a ride. Ami thought she needed help. Without thinking much, Ami slowed down and stopped. The woman opened the door and got in. The woman gently thanked Ami, explaining that the bus had broken down and she'd be waiting forever if she relied on it. She said she needed a short ride, and Ami agreed. They chatted for a bit, with Ami politely responding, but something didn't feel right. The woman's voice was strange, making Ami feel uneasy. Ami drove for a while in awkward silence. Then suddenly, 2 police cars with blaring sirens sped past them. The woman next to Ami tensed up, acting strangely as if she were hiding something. That's when Ami noticed the woman gripping her purse tightly. Something shiny caught her eye. It looked like metal, maybe a knife. Every instinct told her that something was very wrong. She kept driving, trying to stay calm. She didn't know what to do, but she couldn't let on that she had seen it. That's when she noticed something strange. The woman's hair looked unnatural. Ami glanced over and realized she was wearing a wig. Beneath it, she could see stubble and thick hair on the woman's face and arms. This wasn't a pregnant woman at all. This was someone of an entirely different gender. She was a man. This wasn't just a hitchhiker. This was a dangerous person who had clearly planned this. Ami slowed down and stopped the car by the side of the road, hoping to buy herself a little more time. He immediately asked her why she had stopped the car. She started lying to distract him. She said she was feeling unwell and needed to stop and step outside for a bit. Her hands began trembling as she gripped the door handle. As soon as she stepped out of the car, she left the engine running. Luckily, her car had an anti-theft system, the only thing stopping the car from being driven without her. He got into the driver's seat and tried to drive it away, but suddenly the engine stopped. He angrily got out, still in the guise of a woman. He began shouting, telling her to come back, but she pretended not to hear and kept walking. She heard his frantic footsteps behind her. Ami turned to see him rushing towards her, the wig falling off, revealing the truth as she had predicted. She could only run as fast as she could. A car approached and slowed down when they saw her. Ami waved frantically, begging them to stop. When they did, she pleaded for help, telling them someone was chasing her. The driver didn't say anything, but they saw the panic in her eyes and let her into the car. They drove back to where Amy's car was, but by the time they arrived, he had disappeared. Ami reported the incident to the police. Not long after, they found and arrested the hitchhiker, a dangerous fugitive, wanted for a string of crimes. She could have been his next victim if she hadn't been alert. Pharmacy obsession. It was a quiet evening. Lily had been working as a pharmacy technician for a few years. It was a simple job, filling prescriptions and dispensing medications. The pharmacy had its regular customers, Some were friendly, while others were a bit odd, but everyone got used to them. Joe was one of those regulars, a man in his mid-30s who came by often. He stood out with his long, disheveled hair and eccentric clothing. Lily had seen Joe and his elderly mother many times. She was always his caretaker, bringing Joe in to get his medication. The mix of drugs he needed included antipsychotics, antidepressants, anti-anxiety meds, and a type of medicine for infectious diseases. Joe always complimented Lily and called her Kitty because she wore a pink bow hair clip. It was harmless, though strange. Lily would politely smile, chat, and give him his medication. He never made her feel unsafe. One day, Joe's mother came alone. She looked tired, older than before. She told them that Joe wasn't well. He had stopped taking his antipsychotic medication and was becoming unpredictable, sometimes even aggressive. She could no longer control him. The court had declared Joe unfit to make decisions, so he was admitted to a mental health facility. Lily felt a bit sad, missing the familiar face, but relieved knowing Joe was being taken care of. For months, they didn't see Joe. The facility's staff regularly picked up his prescriptions, and life at the pharmacy went on as usual. Then, one Friday night, everything changed. It was late. Only she and another female colleague were working. The store was quiet, as it often was on Friday nights. Lily was reading a magazine at the counter. Then, she heard a voice.
"Hey, Kitty."
At first, she didn't look up. After all, she wasn't Kitty, and she figured someone in the store was talking. But then the voice came again, angrier this time.
"Kitty!"
Suddenly, a bloodied hand slammed onto the counter in front of Lily, startling her. It was Joe, but something was wrong. He was bleeding heavily. The counter was smeared with Joe's bloody handprint. His face was pale, his eyes wild, like he had lost his mind. Her heart raced, and she slowly backed away from him. Lily's colleague, Jane, hurried over, concerned, asking what Joe was doing there since his medication had already been picked up on Tuesday. Joe didn't answer. He just kept staring at Lily, his voice soft but filled with dangerous intensity. He said he wanted to see Kitty and that he missed her. He started moving toward the waist-high door that separated the pharmacy counter from the rest of the store. Panic rose in Lily. Jane tried to calm him down, but Joe kept repeating the same demand, saying he wanted to see Kitty and telling Lily to come closer. She shook her head, fear rising inside her. She refused Joe, saying she couldn't come closer. But he didn't stop, beginning to cry and then scream. He started climbing over the counter, his bloody hands gripping the edge, leaving deep red stains on the white surface. Jane realized things were getting out of control and told Lily to hide in the storage room. Lily slammed the door shut and locked it, listening as Joe's voice turned into full-blown screams. He was throwing things all over the store in a frenzy, grabbing whatever he could reach. Blood spattered over bottles and shelves. Jane called the store manager and quickly phoned the police. Through the crack of the door, Lily could see the chaos. A few customers had gathered, staring in shock. One of them moved as if they were about to intervene. Both Lily and Jane shouted together,
"Don't touch him!"
because Joe had an infectious disease, and his blood was everywhere. Anyone who touched him would be at risk of infection. The police arrived quickly, but didn't rush in. They were wearing full protective gear, gloves, masks, and all because of Joe's blood. They cautiously approached him. At first, he resisted, screaming for Lily. But finally, the police managed to sneak behind him and sedate him. Joe collapsed to the floor, unconscious, and his bloody rampage was over. The store had to be closed. A specialized cleaning crew came to disinfect everything. A few days later, after the store reopened, Joe's mother came by to apologize. Joe was then transferred to a higher security facility. where he would be more closely monitored. The smell of blood and the fear still lingered in Lily's memory. She hadn't seen Joe since that night. She heard that Joe's mother had considered suing the care facility for negligence, but she didn't follow up on what happened next. She just continued her work, but she would never forget him. Strange clown in the parking lot. It was a chilly October evening in 2016, just a few weeks before Halloween. My friends, Jake and Sarah, and I decided to catch a late-night movie at the local theater. After the movie, which ended around midnight, we lingered in the parking lot, chatting and enjoying the crisp autumn air. The parking lot was mostly empty, illuminated by a few dim streetlights, creating long shadows that danced eerily around us. As we laughed about the horror movie we had just seen, Jake suddenly fell silent, staring behind us. We turned to see a clown standing by an old, beat-up car at the edge of the parking lot. He was dressed in a dirty, oversized clown suit with a red wig and smeared white face paint. Unlike the clowns at birthday parties, this one had a sinister air about him, his smile too wide and his eyes too dark. At first, we thought it was a prank. After all, clown sightings had become a bizarre trend that year. But as he started walking towards us, the playful notion quickly vanished. His movements were slow and deliberate, and in his gloved hand, he held a balloon that bobbed menacingly with each step. Nervously, we decided to head to Jake's car, which was parked a short distance away. We tried to act casual, but our pace quickened with each step. The clown followed, maintaining a steady, unnerving pace. My heart pounded as we reached the car and scrambled inside. Jake fumbled with the keys, his hands shaking. Just as we locked the doors, the clown reached the car. He leaned against the driver's side window, his face inches away from Jake's. He pressed the balloon against the glass and slowly dragged his finger down the window, leaving a streak in the condensation. We could see his eyes clearly now, cold and calculating. He tapped on the glass, the sound echoing in the silent parking lot. We were frozen with fear, unsure of what to do next. The clown then moved to the front of the car, standing directly in the headlights. He reached into his oversized pocket and pulled out a long, jagged knife. The sight of the blade sent a fresh wave of panic through us. Jake finally snapped out of his shock and started the car. The engine roared to life, and the clown took a step back, still smiling that unsettling smile. We peeled out of the parking lot, tires screeching, and didn't stop until we were miles away, parked in front of a 24-hour diner. We sat in the car, catching our breath and trying to make sense of what had just happened. We debated calling the police, but without any real harm done, we doubted they'd take us seriously. In the end, we decided to keep the story to ourselves, not wanting to relive the terrifying encounter. To this day, the image of that clown and his menacing smile haunts us. We often wonder what his intentions were and shudder at the thought of what might have happened if we hadn't reached the car in time. The experience left a lasting impression, a chilling reminder that sometimes the scariest encounters are the ones that seem to step straight out of a nightmare. The crazy man blocked the truck. It was a torrential, rainy day. After finishing a long, exhausting day at work, I drove my old, large truck back home. The windshield wipers battled against the pouring rain, moving in a steady, hypnotic rhythm. The radio crackled faintly, almost drowned out by the sound of rain pounding on the truck's metal body. The road ahead was nearly deserted, A winding path through a remote forest. Tall, ominous trees loomed on both sides, their branches reaching out like twisted, skeletal hands. My hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, my knuckles white from the cold. My eyes were focused on the road, but my gaze was weary, longing to be home soon. As I rounded a bend in the road, my headlights caught a figure standing in the middle of the road. Finding it strange, I drove a short distance further and then pulled over to the side of the road to rest for a moment. From a distance, there was that figure again. The silhouette was of a man, his hair disheveled and soaked by the rain. He stood motionless, his head slightly tilted to one side, staring straight at me with wide, unblinking eyes. His clothes were tattered and drenched, clinging to his gaunt frame. In his hand, he held something long, thin, and menacing under the headlights. My heart raced as I stared at the man, an instinctual sense of danger warning me. The man did not move, did not blink, just stood there, staring. My breath fogged up the window as I pondered what to do, making his already ominous figure appear even more distorted and terrifying. But before I could act, the man suddenly lunged forward, slamming his hand on the hood of the truck. The force of the impact made me jump out of my seat, my heart pounding. The man's face was now just inches from the windshield. His eyes were wild and bloodshot. I recoiled in horror as I realized the object in his hand was a long, sharp needle, attached to a syringe filled with a murky yellow liquid. The man's mouth curled into a deranged smile, revealing yellowed and cracked teeth. He lifted the needle, tapping it lightly with his finger as if preparing to use it. He fumbled with the door lock, as if deliberately trying to frighten me. The rain outside seemed to grow louder, darkening the scene with a rising sense of dread. The man moved with terrifying speed. He lunged at the side door, yanking it open with astonishing strength. I could barely think, and there was no time to react before the man lunged at me. The syringe was raised, aimed straight at my neck. I struggled, adrenaline surging through my veins as I tried to push the man away. But his grip was like iron, his strength fueled by madness. My mind was a whirlwind of fear and confusion. Who was this man? What did he want? Why was he doing this? The questions swirled in my head, but there were no answers, only a desperate need to survive. The man giggled, a high-pitched, maniacal sound. The needle inched closer. I twisted and turned, trying to evade it, but the man was relentless. In one final desperate move, I surged with a burst of life. I managed to grab the man's wrist. We wrestled, fighting for control. The man's eyes were wide and wild. His foul breath hit my face in a horrific gust. With gritted teeth, I mustered all my remaining strength and shoved the man back with a powerful force, sending him tumbling backward. The syringe fell to the ground, the needle shattering upon impact, the liquid inside spilling out and mixing with the rain. I slammed the door shut and locked it, breathing heavily, tense with fear. I watched as the man staggered to his feet. He let out a frustrated scream, his voice echoing through the empty forest. I didn't wait to see what he would do next. I quickly shifted the truck into gear and hit the gas, the truck speeding away from the deranged man. Exhausted and shaken from the struggle, I drove in silence, quickly contacting the police about the incident and heading straight to the hospital. The man's wild eyes, his maniacal grin, the syringe filled with that strange liquid, they all haunted my mind. After the police investigated, They finally apprehended him and placed him in custody for psychiatric treatment. It turned out he wasn't just targeting me. He was after others as well, all as part of the twisted pleasure of a deranged mind. Night shift at the morgue. I worked as a security guard at a local hospital in the morgue area. The place often experienced break-ins by a few addicts trying to experiment with some strange chemicals stored in the lab, and eventually it became their final resting place. Everything started like a normal night shift. Hygiene plays a crucial role in the hospital. To keep the place more sanitary, they recently installed automatic sliding doors that open when someone passes by, eliminating the need to touch any door handles. Every night at exactly 3:00 a.m., the door would open for a few seconds and then close again. I believe the door was programmed with some kind of time-based trigger, but when I contacted the door installation company, they told me that was impossible since the door was designed to open only when the sensor was activated or manually operated. So, this continued without explanation for a long time and became a routine for everyone watching the door open and close on the monitor every night. Tonight, I was on shift alone because my colleague was sick, and there wasn't enough time to find a temporary replacement on such short notice. I was no stranger to danger and didn't worry about working alone at night. The security monitors showed only 2 cameras, one facing the control room and another at the far end of the hallway looking toward the morgue entrance. When the clock struck 3:00 a.m., I did what every night guard on duty would do. I started watching the screen. As usual, the door moved, but honestly, I still got chills sometimes from the sudden rush of cold air every time the door opened. Suddenly, the door remained open. I thought it was a screen glitch, but the lights on the door were still flashing. I waited a few minutes, but I soon realized I had to go down the hallway because the morgue door was strictly prohibited from being left open. As I walked down the hallway, the cold air blew against me, and I thought it would be even colder when I reached the morgue. I had hoped that the door might have closed by the time I got there, but just as I saw on the monitor, the door was indeed still open, and the camera was functioning normally. I tried waving my hand in front of the sensor, but it was useless. The door didn't budge. I reluctantly considered my next option, which was to check the sensors from the inside. As I turned around to look down the hallway, the door finally closed. I felt my hair stand on end as a strange quietness settled in a sensation like someone was standing right behind me. Out of curiosity, I went back to the monitor. I decided to rewind the security footage to the moment I approached the door to see if I could spot anything unusual. And what I saw was something I shouldn't have witnessed. There was a girl standing in front of the door behind me. I couldn't clearly see her face because of her long black hair and the white dress she was wearing. She just stood there smiling, staring at me with one eye. To this day, I still can't explain it, as I had just been there and hadn't seen anyone. It wasn't until I checked the other camera that faced the entrance to the control room that I truly shuddered, and I still have nightmares about it to this day. Due to a mysterious power surge, most of the data on the drive was completely corrupted. I stared at the blank screen, my mind reeling. The events of that night played over and over in my head, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still in the room, watching from the shadows. Every night, as I try to sleep, when the clock strikes 3:00 a.m., I can still feel the chill in the air, the weight of invisible eyes on my back, and the quiet whisper of the girl who is there.